Is coronavirus and the latest developments surrounding the coronavirus. We're on day 18 of the lockdown now. The country has witnessed the biggest jump in the number of deaths and new cases. 40 deaths and 1,035 new cases have been reported in India in the last 24 hours. The total number of cases well past the 7,000 mark now, with 7,447 cases. Now, 643 people have recovered and have been discharged. In fact, in a short while from now, the Prime Minister will be holding a video conference with chief ministers of all states. That is likely to start any time now. And a decision on the lockdown extension is likely to be taken at this meeting. And hopefully during the weekend, we are likely to hear something about the future of the lockdown in the national lockdown. In fact, let me go across to Managing Editor Vinay Tiwari, who's joining me right now. Vinay, obviously this is going to be very key, this meeting between the Prime Minister and Chief Ministers, in finally coming to a decision on what exactly needs to happen with respect to the future of the lockdown.
Yes, and I think a few things have happened which have been a bit of an indicator of how the chief ministers are thinking. Remember, 2 states now have officially and formally announced extension of lockdowns on their own. And that kind of gives you a sense that the chief ministers do recognize that the curve has not exactly been flattened as yet, and that India is possibly in a decisive stage right now to carry out this fight against coronavirus. And remember, today we've reported since morning how this has been the single day's highest jump. Over 1,000 cases have been reported. That's the highest jump that we reported so far. So very obviously, I think we can almost expect the Prime Minister to maybe speak to the other chief ministers who've not formed up their mind, get a sense of what they should do. And by tomorrow is when we are expecting that announcement from the Prime Minister as well. So it's pretty certain that we are going to be looking at an extension of the lockdown. And it's also pretty certain that most chief ministers of states seem to be in sync on that issue as well, Avni.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, the key thing to watch out for is going to be how long is this lockdown going to be extended? Is it going to be just another week or two, or is it going to be another full 3 weeks of lockdown extension that we're really looking for? Because there's so many other issues then also crop up, like we've been also reporting about the way the essential supplies are being hit across the country. So all of those things will have to really be taken into account, and, you know, sort of a proper plan will have to be made about how to ensure that supplies continue.
Yes, and I think that's part of the discussions that we will have, between the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Modi, as well as the Chief Ministers. Because remember, in any scenario, the topmost priority for a government would be to save lives, and to save lives with an enemy you can't see and you can't even predict. So very obviously, that is the priority number one. So if there are extreme measures that are being imposed by states, this is entirely for the benefit of people. I mean, I think now we've seen enough and more examples where states have experimented, very strict lockdown measures in certain areas, and those containment measures have actually yielded results. Delhi yesterday spoke about the Dilshad Garden experiment, where they had 7 cases in the first 3 days, and ever since they actually, had a very strict implementation of the lockdown, they've not had a single case in the last 14 days or so. There are other examples also now in various parts of the country where similar things have yielded results. So it's very obvious that yes, there is a bit of a problem that people are facing because of essentials, especially in the urban centers. But extreme implementation of lockdown possibly is the only way out. The other thing, Avni, that you raise is very important. There is a bit of an issue currently in the hinterland in India, because the Punjab Chief Minister, for instance, has been raising concerns over the harvesting season that is getting delayed. There is a lot of standing crop that is there in many of the agrarian states in India. And if that harvesting doesn't happen right now, it can possibly lead to damage if it has already not started doing it already. I mean, we've heard some reports from various states where animals have entered farms and have started damaging crops because the farmers can't go out. So yes, some states, I'm sure, are going to raise those concerns to the Prime Minister's office, where a very selective and a controlled relaxation to carry out certain specific tasks should be allowed. Whether the central government actually agrees to that or not, we don't know, because they are also taking help from 11 special groups that have been formed, including the ICMR and the NDMA. And I think they are going to go back to them to take advice from them and whether these selective requests that are coming from states should be accepted or not. Post that, of course, the final decision gets taken up.
That's right. Vinay, just to take that point forward, if you can shed some light on how the implementation of this is going to work, because, like you pointed out, if some of the states have certain requests or certain relaxations in areas that they are looking for, will the center just give out a guideline that states have to then implement in their own way, or will the states have to, be forced to implement exactly what the center says?
That depends on the current lockdown that you see, which was announced by Mr. Modi, has been announced under the Disaster Management Act. And that's a central law which is binding on every state. You cannot use your own interpretation for it. So it depends on the law that is used to invoke a particular order. If you remember, in states like Maharashtra, the lockdown had gotten announced even before the national lockdown. Odisha had done it before the national lockdown. Now, when a state government enforces a lockdown, they invoke state laws, which could be IPC, which could be CRPC, which could be their state disease control acts, and that's how their jurisdiction extends to their state. But the central government obviously is using a national act to do this. My assumption is that if the Prime Minister announces an extension of the lockdown, it will be under the same central act. Having said that, when a government announces a lockdown measure, they also specify the exemption list, like it was done in the notification for this case. For instance, there was a category of essential services that included the health services, the ambulance drivers, the water supply, the power supply, media, and so on and so forth. Now, whether that exemption list gets increased depending on the state's request, or it actually gets curtailed depending on the problems the government feels are being experienced in states, we don't know. And I don't think it's fair to speculate on that, because that's a very tricky situation. Remember, Avni, one pointer that I think we must tell our viewers is this. In a lot of states where the impact of corona has been severe, they've actually tightened the measures and not relaxed them, despite demands for some bit of relaxation because of problems. In Maharashtra, for instance, there has been an extreme tightening of measures around mandis because they were worried that social distancing was not being practiced there properly. Some other states have shown similar examples where a complete shutdown has been ordered. In UP, for instance, in certain districts in Noida, certain parts of Noida's complete shutdown has been announced because the social distancing was not being followed. So far, the trajectory and the sense that we are getting from states is that they're favoring stricter lockdown measures in the urban and the suburban areas of large towns. The only question mark is whether in the rural areas where social distancing is probably a little more possible because of the space available, but obviously with a little slightly more difficult implementation measure, will that be acceded to or not? And also some requests that have gone from industrial bodies, because some of them want some selective controlled production lines to start, because that some bit of the supply chain disruption has also been reported.